and welcome everyone to Season 2 of Soul and Science, where psychology meets ancient wisdom. Our theme this month for Season 2 is From Victim to Victor, the podcast where we explore the transformative journey of healing and personal empowerment. Through inspiring stories, insights, and practical tools, we'll guide you from a place of victimhood to victory, from unconscious patterns to conscious, empowered living. Whether you're navigating trauma, striving for personal growth, or simply looking for a deeper understanding of how to reclaim your power, this will give you an insight and a few tools to help you on that journey. Join me, Nyana, a psychotherapist, and Ardaas, a spiritual teacher, as we dive deeper into the connection of mind, body, soul, and its incredible ability to heal and rise and elevate. While this may not be a therapy session, and we invite you to seek professional advice where needed, this may allow you to get closer to understanding where you have been stuck in the past and how you can be reborn to be victorious. Hello and welcome to the first episode. Welcome Ardaas ji to the first episode of season 2.
Hello,
Today we're
welcome
going to talk
everyone. Sorry.
Today we're going to talk about the mind-body disconnect and understanding trauma's impact. Is there anything you would like to begin with, Ardaas ji, before we jump right into trauma and its journey from victim to victor?
Yeah, this is just to say this is the second season. Last season we were working on relationships, and every now and then this topic would come up as we were addressing different factors in relationships, how trauma affects us. And since we have, Nyana is an expert on the topic, and the topic was coming up again and again, we thought it was worth dedicating a season on this. And what is trauma about, and how can we do the process of healing? So this is the motivation for us starting this second season.
Thank you for sharing that, Ardaas ji, and I'm going to dive right into a topic that feels so close to my heart, which is beginning a little bit about what is trauma. And that my own journey with this has brought this so close to my own deeper understanding with every client that comes through the door and every training that I do and every conversation that I have. And the most popular one right now as a definition is by Dr. Gabor Mate, that everybody talks about, is that trauma is not what happened to you, but what happens inside of you because of what happened to you. And that it is not just an event that occurs, but also its impact in the body, mind, spirit experience. And that trauma could be anything big or small. There's small T's and big T's. There are big events such as sexual abuse or warfare that lead to trauma, or they could be microaggressions, emotional neglect, emotional abuse that can serve as trauma. And that the most important being that what is traumatic for one person may not seem traumatic for another. And so it doesn't have to be a very standard definition of what trauma is. But also the understanding that trauma, when it happens, the absence of having somebody to process that emotional experience and what we make it mean about us in the process, because that gives us a lot of the understanding of this happened to me because, and we make it personal, that adds to the element of the pain of trauma. So it's not just the event, but the layers and formations that we do as human beings in meaning making about what that trauma meant about me, and its residue that it holds as an emotionally unprocessed event in the body that creates a lot of the destruction, disharmony, and dysfunction in a human being's psyche or in their behavior. Is there
Can
anything
you
you
tell
wanted
us a
to
bit
share?
more about this? What does it mean to process emotionally? Maybe would be interesting.
Yeah, so if I were, for example, to have grown up in a home where there was a lot of violence, for example, and I'm looking at this specifically from early childhood, and that would be the a similar experience for, say, a woman who is in a violent relationship. And that I am constantly taking in the experience of either being, the sense of danger or being at risk, or the person's going to attack me, and all of those things, they stay stuck in the body. And I'm not fully able to express, because if I say something, it may be dangerous, my life may be at risk, I may get hit, my children may, they may be some kind of threat to them. As children, when we see it, it's the same thing. I can't express the terror or the agony or the pain or the fear or the sadness that I feel when I watch my parents fighting, or when I see my mother at risk or my father at risk. What that is doing to me becomes very overwhelming. I don't have the words. And that just becomes a big ball of unprocessed emotion in the body that gets stuck somewhere in the soma. And so a lot of trauma work requires us to move and do somatic work, or yoga, to start moving that form that has been created in the body, that may get triggered in an event in the future that feels potentially dangerous or similar. And then it creates almost its own persona or person inside that's living, waiting to sort of protect me, living in a constant state of danger and hypervigilance. So the body does not have, it becomes like this wound, and the more we don't address the wound, the more scar it creates and the more rigid it becomes. So our ability to be flexible in life, to show up completely, all of that gets inhibited. And we start living more with inhibition, because we're almost afraid of the pain it may cause if something touches that wound that hasn't been addressed. And so we're
Right.
almost living more self-protected than we are whole and complete and willing, with the ability to see possibility. The only thing we can see is, how do I stay away from danger and how do I survive? So our programming is attuned to only being safe and survival. And that's the second or third layer of trauma, is that then we get disconnected from the essence of who we are in that joyous, natural, happy state that we all come with.
Right. So let's say a person who is healthy in all levels and stable and in contact with his inner self will go through an experience, and as something is happening and maybe somebody says something nasty to you, let's say, for example, and somebody in the street and may look dangerous, if you are healthy and stable, you will see that there may be some reaction to what they are saying to us, and we may want to feel some sort of there may be some emotion coming to the surface, but as we hear those words or see those actions, we can feel that emotion and let it go in the moment. That would be like my way of understanding that processing. No, so if you are healthy, oh, he's saying something to me. I don't know this guy. Why is he saying that? Well, I don't know. Maybe he's having a bad day. Okay, well, who knows? I will just let it go, right? And we can just let it pass, and that's it. While if we are not healthy and stable, somebody says something nasty to us and we may react, and maybe we will run away. We will be very scared for our lives. So we will be angry and shout at him and things like that. No? So the moment that we don't process something in the moment, that the emotional reaction that we created out of whatever is inside of us, it kind of triggers the mechanism that is going to record again within us the feeling of something dangerous happen, and therefore we keep re-triggering ourselves and re-recording within us this emotion that has been not processed in that moment. No, so the ideal would be to reach a point where we can process things as they come up during the day and let them go so that they don't accumulate.
Yeah.
And then, but for to do that, we need to find the balance within, and that would be the concept of trauma and what trauma has caused. That is that right?
That's correct. And the earlier the trauma and the less presence of somebody, because when you're a child, you really don't have that space to
Exactly.
emotionally process on your own. And so you
Exactly.
know, need a present adult or somebody who can help you understand, hey, that child is not bullying you because there's something wrong with you or you're a bad person, or if that isn't available, then that's what happens with the meaning making with the child, and they get stuck. And so tomorrow, anytime they may see someone who looks remotely bigger than them, they may feel too that it's too, I can't go there, and they stop going out, or they start feeling that, people are dangerous, or the world is a dangerous place, and they start creating meaning. And that's where our narratives of our life begin to show up, that the world is not a safe space, or I'm alone, or I need, I'm weak and I cannot be protected. And we start living from those experiences and creating a narrative around it, to make sense of what is happening. And then that's not processed, and that becomes not just an experience but the truth of my life, and a narrative or a story that I keep repeating every time a similar, or not even a similar, but an experience such as that shows up, and I react sometimes even larger than what it may require.
So let me ask you from this psychological perspective. There is two twin brothers going through the same, um, let's say, circumstances around their life. So they eat the same kind of food, they have the same parents, the environment is the same, the school they go is the same. So everything is very similar, and even the genetic is quite similar. And yet, as they are, let's say they experience something happens, and one of them will record that as traumatic and the other one will not. What is the key difference that makes that one will take it as a trauma and the other one will not?
According to research, and what Dr. Gabor Mate says, is one is every child is born with their own temperament. So even if you are twins, you may see extremely different temperaments that will show up. One may be a quieter child, one may be more outgoing, one may be more shy, one may be more social, and they will have different temperaments. So the temperament definitely matters. And the second is, the truth is that no matter what, both kids will not have the same parents. How you respond to one child based on so many different factors is different from the other, and that could be so many of our unconscious trainings, so many of our unconscious beliefs. So much of how I'm relating to that child is that child, you know listens to what I say, or are they more willful, for example, will impact my relationship with the child as a parent, right? And that
Okay.
unconscious does impact whether the child my relationship with the child and the attachment that it creates. And that impacts, secondly, whether the child would come and tell me or not if they were facing something, and how I might show up for the child as well. So today, I mean, if we really talk about it, Gabor says you never have, both siblings do not ever have the same parent.
All right. So let's take that in that direction. If the parents behave differently with every child, and I accept that, and the temperament is different, I also accept that. Can you identify what kind of temperament is the one that creates the feeling of trauma, the one that creates the reaction within the child that makes it so traumatic, and what kind of temperament makes him go through life in a different way that he doesn't get scored by that?
So I don't think we have a clear answer yet, Ardaas, but what we do understand is that the presence of a present primary caregiver that is able to sit with the processing with each of the child, self-soothing, and actually having an understanding that they're safe, protective, and loved, and that they can go to the primary caregiver and there'll be someone there to protect them. It allows that safety and security belt to occur, that when the trauma happens, I'm able to come to somebody, share it, and I know that I will be provided the warmth, the emotional processing that I would need in that moment. So many times when we do trauma work, and this is something that Gabor talks about a lot, he asks the question, when this was happening to you, who did you talk to? And they'll say no one. And it could be something as big as sexual abuse and things, and they're like, why not? And that's where he says that the disconnection was already present. The child was not able to go and talk to somebody at all, and they were alone in their terror. And that disconnection, or that lapse of trust or attachment that has occurred, for whatever may be the reason, there's nobody, we can't really say what may have caused that, lets the child know that I do not have a place to go to kind of share this and process what I need to process. And that's a story we hear with trauma over and over again, is who did you speak to? Nobody. I dealt with it on my own. Why not? My parents were busy, they were too busy doing something else, and therefore I thought I cannot. And the child may be as simple as being, I don't want to disturb my parents, or I don't want to be a burden, or maybe if they tell me, they will not understand and I may get punished because they'll think I've done something wrong. Or the child may believe that it's my fault. And so they end up being in that terror or that situation of emotion by themselves, and they do not have the nervous system or the parts of the brain required to actually process that level of disruption that they may be facing.
Okay. I think it's good to, well, first of all, this can happen as an adult as well. I think we are right now focusing on a child being traumatized. This could be in an adult as well, but
Yes.
it's a good example. And so I'm hearing a lot of guilt and shame and things like that in terms of if I don't want to disturb my parents. So already behind that there is like um, there is a feeling that I am a disturbance in a way, no, and that means I feel guilty of being that disturbing element in the family, no, or some things happen to me and maybe it's my fault. There is some shame in that, feeling that maybe I created the situation, so there is this shame. So there is this what we call mind games in yoga, guilt and shame, and there is a few more, and there's a lot more actually. But this, so the presence of these mind games or the sensitivity to those are going to be part of the temperament that is more likely going to create this as a traumatic event. Yeah,
Yes.
that
Yes.
makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And that is, I think, the time when the ego is being developed as well,
Right,
of the
right.
child. And the temperament impacts the development of the ego. And what we do know is, we call it the terrible twos. That's the time when you are really egocentric, right? The child is beginning to demand its place in the world, and wants its needs and wants met. And a lot of the conversations around is that when these needs are not met in chronic situations of abuse and neglect, and then that stays in a frustrated state and may show up over and over again. And then the story becomes, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable enough, I need my way, I want my way. And that continues to remain as a very frustrated part. And that's a lot of the pain body of these unmet needs that a lot of psychology talks about. Edwin Schneidman talks about it in suicidologies as unmet needs that causes the psychic, that leads to suicidality. Maslow talks about the hierarchy of needs of safety and love and all these needs being met. So this concept of need and who am I in this world and I exist comes very during those years of 2 to 7 years old, right? The early stages of development and psychological development and development of the ego, which at that point of time, the child is in creating a sense that I exist. And if that is shut down, then the child becomes more willful, or counter will develops, and splitting may occur at a young age of the fragmentation of the ego into parts which are not wholly integrated. And that's when we start seeing disruptions also in counter will and behavior, where the child is beginning to say, hey, I exist, and you're not seeing that. And the more there is the forcefulness or control from outside, the more the child begins to disrupt. And there needs to be a balance, especially at the time of healthy ego development in early childhood needs of safety and survival, and the sense of self that is getting created in that time to be valued and validated, which then goes into this negative sense of self, which is another aspect of trauma, which I think is a very key aspect that we can talk about here today.
Yes, I don't know how much in depth we will go into these details, elements, but we definitely need to explore them. Maybe if not in this episode, in some others. But let me take these needs. I think they are a key component to why trauma occurs as well. And the way you speak, in yogic terms, we would think about the first chakras, the first two chakras, basically. And I'm hearing a lot about the first one, which is in terms of survival. The first chakra is about survival. Is the most basic, um, let's say, interest that we have. The most basic need is to survive, to continue existing. And then needs go on to the second chakra as well, and the second chakra speaks a lot about need to in different forms. Yeah, often the second chakra is associated to sexuality, but not just sexuality. There's a lot of things about what do I need, that is linked to the second chakra as well. So I'm hearing a lot about survival and needs, and the most basic need is to survive. And if I feel threatened, if that survival feels threatened by whatever is happening, then I will. That will be a very. If I feel danger in a situation, that's going to trigger my most internal primal mechanisms within me to survive. So let's take it on that direction. I was trying to explore why would trauma even happen? What is the use of trauma? What's the use of uh, creating trauma on a child? Because everything has its own use in a way in nature, and if we have emotions, emotions have its own use. So for example, if I have the feeling of aggression, if I feel aggressive, and we could identify that as anger, that aggression may come from a moment when we need to face a lion who is coming to threaten our family. So you need to protect the family, get in front of the lion and fight it. And you're going to need to call upon your own aggressive nature within. Right? There's going to be a lot of fire within, and that's going to feel like anger. You may need to call upon that anger to protect the family. So the emotion of aggression linked to that anger has an advantage evolutionarily speaking. Yeah, if we talk from evolutionary terms, the
Yes.
same way with sadness and the same way with fear, these all have an advantage. So I was considering what's the advantage of trauma, and I was considering how, and you first, this is from my yogic understanding, but also my philosophical nature, yeah, to try to explore something. So maybe you have something more scientific that you can guide us in this conversation. But my feeling was going in this way. When we are in nature, living in nature, there is two basic as children, when we are very little, we're talking about children. So there's going to be two different pools. One pool is forward. This is kind of like from the amygdala, yeah? One pool is going to be forward because we're interested about something. So maybe we see a little red thing and we are curious about that. And that's going to be useful because that's what allows us to find berries and tomatoes and whatever. No? So food for us, food is identifiable, and we even develop some capacity in our eyesight to be able to see things that are nourishment for us. So shiny things, colorful things are interesting, and we are curious about those. So curiosity was a major element. And then that's a pull forward. And a pull back is something that might be dangerous. So I see something that is unknown, And because it's unknown, I don't know if it could be harmful to me. So the first time we see a spider or a snake or some other animal in nature, we may feel this careful, no? Careful, this inner pulling backwards. And that curiosity, curious and careful, I was feeling how there might be a pull between these two forces of being curious and careful. And in a balanced state, that's perfectly fine. And in a child who is healthy and an adult who becomes healthy, then this is perfectly fine. It's good that we have these two pulls. That's perfectly fine. When it becomes imbalance is when, let's say, an experience is you thought you were curious for something and then it turns out that it's something dangerous to you. For example, now let's say you're curious about some little red thing. When you get close, it's actually a spider. And now the spider is on top of your hand and now you don't know what to do. And now for our brain to record that as a traumatic experience could be useful in a survival sense because something was shocking and surprising, especially surprises. They trigger parts of our brain that are very internal. That's why jokes work. You know, a joke has something, an element that is surprising, that is different, and it's suddenly and then wow, then you laugh because it's a release of energy and emotion. Well, in the same way as a joke works, if something you thought it was a little button and then you touch it and it's actually a spider, suddenly that shock is going to make sure that we are going to remember that to survive, right? And if the memory is nice, that's going to be a joke that's going to be with you all your life. If the memory is not good, that's going to be a trauma. That could be a trauma. So an experience that is shocking enough and it's telling you be careful because you're in danger, that could create a trauma, or an experience that is a little bit shocking but repeatedly, constantly, again and again and again, so that it's not that you have one big spider on your arm, but there is always spiders everywhere, little spiders, and you're always surrounded by spiders, and you're like, where is the next spider? So you may get this focused on where are the spiders so that I can avoid them. So does it make sense that there is a meaning and a reasonable existence for trauma within the context of survival?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we're wired for survival, and the whole system is developed to able to go towards or come again away from, go towards for the purposes of survival, eating, creation, procreation, or to come away from for existence, protection. So there is absolutely an inherent um, necessity for that to exist. Absolutely, Ardaas ji.
Okay, good. So let's take it from there. Uh, this triggering of pulling forward or pulling backwards is mainly with things which are different from us, with things that are unknown to us. And one of the first mechanisms is, first of all, be careful before you are curious, right? So it's better to survive and not know what that is, but than to find something new to eat. But so we have this mechanism to be uh, careful, maybe even fearful of something that is unknown to us. Yeah. And here is where it becomes interesting because first of all, God is unknown. Who knows God, right? God could be, we could say, is the greatest unknown. So, in a way, even for people who are pursuing a spiritual life and pursuing a connection to this divine essence, whatever we want to relate to it, I mean, whatever we understand God to be, it's unknown. Therefore, there's going to be this feeling of, oh, I'm curious, but I'm also careful and maybe fearful out of that. So that's one thing. Another thing is the greatest potential that we have as human beings, our most realized self, we are not there yet. We are not Buddha. Okay, so our Buddha nature or our Christ consciousness or whatever we want to call it, right? My Buddha nature is unknown to me, and therefore a part of me is also going to be afraid of reaching that. So to me, that's interesting in the context that we do yoga to find that Buddha nature. We do yoga to reach some connection to the divine. And yet we have this very, very primal instinct to protect and to be afraid of something that is unknown. So what I'm getting to is that trauma is actually a hindrance to our spiritual development,
Mm.
and starts from the moment that when we see something that is unknown, we can be careful or we can go into fearful. And we generally say in yoga that there is three a problem always manifests in three ways: too little, too much, or the wrong kind.
Mm.
So I can imagine how they can be too little careful, too much careful, that would be more into the fearful, or the wrong kind of careful, careful about the things which are not necessarily things that you need to be careful with. And the same with curious. Too
Mm.
little curious, so you are very passive in your life. Too much curious, and maybe you are risk taking and not caring about consequences, bungee jumping and all that. And maybe curious about the wrong kind of things. So, why am I going into all this? Because at the end of the day, we want to heal this trauma. We want to get to a point where we are healthy. And healthy will be a healthy combination between also the curious and the careful. But not careful that becomes fearful, not also careless, because that would be like, I don't care at all, and then you are disconnected from the world, but somehow carefree, like you
Mm.
are free from cares, but while also when something might be dangerous, having the right trigger, the right response to something is not just about, well, I don't respond to I just, whenever something unknown comes, I'll just embrace it. Well, no, you still have to make use of those mechanisms.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. You said it's the right response because with trauma, naturally, with our nervous system, we either go into flight, fight, or freeze. And then there is something called the window of tolerance, which is what you're talking about, which is balance, which is carefree, right? And carefree has an element of trust in
Right?
one's ability and the ability of that around, and also possibly the trust in something greater taking holding this whole thing together. And what's really interesting that you say that is because when I work with clients with trauma, one of the things is this disconnection of trust. And therefore, I'm constantly living in this state of non trust and fear and self preservation. And I live in this almost this walled existence of pain avoidance because the unknown can be painful because it could have
Right.
been right shocking, something could have happened in early experiences that created a lot of pain that I was not prepared for. And so my whole life is about pain avoidance because somewhere I do not have the trust that I'll be taken care of, or I can take care of myself, or there is somebody else that I can go to. And inherently, when we come back, when you talk about the unknown, when you talk about divine, when you talk about God, whatever name that we want to give it, is is that disconnection from trust that I'm going to be okay, that everything is well, which is essentially what trauma does. It takes away that. It creates that sense of I can't trust anyone. I can't trust this world. I can't. My survival's at risk. My safety is off. And a lot of that healing journey is about coming back into that ability to trust one's capacity that they will be okay in this existence. And coming one step deeper is also that connection to the to the part that says I can take care of myself as well. There's a capacity um, it, that says I can take care of myself.
And
Uh,
that may take a while
yeah.
uh, to get there. Yeah, but if we can first identify, it's difficult for me to trust, to open up, and to share this with somebody, because that's already going to be the first hurdle in healing, which will be to first of all recognize whether you have something that has been traumatic and that is challenging today, and to trust enough a therapist, let's say, to approach and to dedicate a period of your life, maybe an hour every week to go there and open up and trust sharing these intimate and vulnerable things about my life, no?
Yeah, and also, Ardasji, like, if my thing is pain avoidance, that's the only way I've learned to survive, right? Is to
Right.
avoid. Then I'm not possibly wanting to go there again. I'm going to switch it off or pack it away neatly and continue to keep it away that I don't have to see it and address it. But it rears its head every time there is a trigger, and I live in this thing that I still can keep it away, so I don't want to deal with the pain. And the truth is that in not seeing it there is more pain, because there is a lot of entanglement in that I'm not addressing. My fear, my sense of I'm, limiting belief, it's my fault, it's happened to me for a reason, it's my karma, God did this to me. And I'm never really addressing to get to the truth of that, that none of this is maybe true.
Yeah,
That
there
the
is that guilt and the shame again. Yeah.
Exactly, and the only way that I could control it was to believe it was my fault and I did something, and then that self deprecation continues, and that self denial and self disgust and self hate becomes this pattern in my life that I am trying to override, but it's become a very unconscious pattern in my life that I don't even know that I am living out of. And that therefore the biggest part of this victim to victor and this journey is to then become aware of this conditioning that has been created unknowingly in order to protect myself as a natural probably response to something that happened earlier but today may no longer be uh, serving me in that way.
You know what I just realized right now, that when you have a client who just comes through the door and they come for the first session, they already had the first victory
Mm,
because they crossed through that barrier and then I don't deserve it, or the fear to trust somebody. They already did it the moment that they chose to come. Well, I mean, unless you have forced ones, right? Somebody, here, treat this guy, But the moment that somebody comes through the door voluntarily, they are already they already have their first victory in their belt.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I'm just going to also highlight another challenge here, though, is that I may come through the door, but my identity is attached to something being wrong with me.
Right.
And so letting go of that identity that I'm at fault, and this is because of me, which is largely linked to the trauma, because it's not just what happened, what I made it mean about me, is
It's
is
not, I
then
wouldn't say it's so much linked about to the trauma, but it's linked to that temperament that made the trauma stick, linked to the guilt and the shame. I mean, why did it that the trauma? I mean, the trauma could be strong enough that it can traumatize anyone, but sometimes it's just that temperament we were talking about, no, the guilt and the shame, or victim personality that is already within us that makes us treat that situation as a trauma. So the origin is not from the moment that that thing happened, but from the attitude that we had before that made that thing stick, I would say.
Yes, parts of it, but also that it depends on when it happens. And the younger you are, the more you make it mean about you, because that's how children are. This happened, it had to be because of me.
Right,
Because a big survival is also that it can't be my parents, because my parents are meant to be these people who have protected me, so it can't be them. They aren't getting angry with me because they are getting angry, and they're getting angry because I'm a bad child. And then that becomes my identity, because nobody's
right,
telling me that hey, I'm getting angry and that's on me as an adult.
right,
uh,
right.
right,
Let,
we
let,
are
let me
telling
let me
the
let me
child that
just
you are a bad child and you are making mommy angry,
right,
right?
and let me just say something, because the way I expressed it before, it might be misinterpreted. So I don't want
Mhm.
to leave any gray area. I'm not saying that we are at fault for whatever happens to us. That is,
Mhm.
it is our guilt and our shame and our temperament that is creating those situations. I'm not saying, yeah, it's our fault. So if anything happened to you, it's your fault. And I'm not saying that. So, but at the same time, how we react and how we feel and the emotions that we feel and in response to everything, that is something that we can change. So
Yes.
it's not about whether we are faulty about something, but it's about if we are, even now as adults, we continue to experience those emotions of guilt and shame and all that thing, then we can change that because that's within our world. So we are responsible for changing that. We are not responsible for whatever happened. Whatever happened, happened. But we are responsible for how we feel now about what happened and also the temperament that created the situation for me to have that strong impact to whatever happened.
Absolutely, because whatever happened and what I did to protect myself was a natural instinct. But I'm just going to go a step further here to say that what's really important is to recognize that what you mentioned earlier, that either you can have one spider or you can have constant spiders, and it's a recurring form of stress, right? And then I develop coping strategies to deal with that stress, right? And then I start wondering, why am I the only one who's having stress? Why is this person not, or that person is not, right? Why is this happening to me? That's the natural question that human beings have. It has to make sense. We're trying to make meaning and sense. That's the nature of the ego. How do I survive if I don't know why it's happening? And the question why begins. And then we have these coping mechanisms that we develop in order to survive, and that becomes our personality.
There's something else as well, though, because and now I'm thinking of a different one. I always try to think of a different example. Yeah. So the one you're describing is kind of somebody who has to go to war and then they are experiencing death and there's fighting and there's people being killed and they are traumatized by everything that is happening around them and why is this happening to me and why do I have to go through this? That's one aspect. But there is also another aspect. Some people who come back from a war, they are traumatized by not what happened to them, but what they did. So, and finding that given the right context, right is the that specific context, they can call upon something within them that they find is evil, and they can find themselves killing, murdering, whatever, doing incredible things that they would have never imagined that they were capable of doing. There's plenty of examples of this in history. And in Second World War, there's plenty of examples of people who found themselves in some regiment somewhere and they were doing atrocities that they would have never imagined that they could do. Then when they come out of the war, what most traumatized them is what they did more than the wars, what happened to them. So it's not only what happened to me, but was I really like that? Was I always like that? Did I have that personality? How could I be like that? And that's a matter of identity. That's so much harder than saying, well, a bad thing happened to me, but let's deal with it. But this is about I am bad, I am evil. That's a much deeper concept, maybe.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting what you're saying is that you've given an example of extreme war, but this is what we're seeing children come out with these days. When they grow up in homes that may not be safe, when there is bullying around, or when there is chronic abuse, or all of that, and that may begin this concept of I am bad can begin very young. Um,
How can you give an example when the child thinks like the one who is in the war and finding some aspect of his personality that he doesn't like, or being evil and not and recognizing that and not liking that, is there an example in children as well?
Yeah, so when there are children who, for example, get bullied and they may react or respond and hit a child back really badly, then they are shocked that they have that capacity to do that. And then there is deep shame and guilt that I behaved in this way, and it's not the first time, then it becomes a thing, because there is anger that I'm being bullied, and it's not something that I know how to either manage or control. I haven't got the skills, nobody's helping me really figure this out, and there is a part of me that I just don't really like. And I see that with a lot of young adults, where there is this part which is being repressed, and they're like, I don't like that part. That part is angry and can say rude and mean things, and I don't want to be that person. And it may not be as chronic as taking somebody's life, but then it's a different kind of a chronic state of self dislike that exists, and I get identified with that, and takes me completely away from the part that I have another part that is pure essence, or a true self, um, that is allowing me to see that that's not who I am, and I can do something about it. So it's not written off in stone that I'm a bad person and I can never be forgiven and I'll be forever this person. But the inability to see that changes, that evolves, and that is something that we can work on. That anger is an emotion, it's come from a certain place, but it doesn't need to mean that you're bad or evil, right? And that that is this negative self, or this false self that gets developed, or an inner critic that gets developed earlier on. And I'm looking at it as more from a day-to-day basis versus a war situation or a veteran or something like that, because that is what we're dealing with today on a day-to-day basis. Is a lot more young adults coming in with this complete disconnection from themselves, with a very strong negative sense of self, and that is very disruptive to the journey of healing, to the journey of, there is something called an ego. An ego is necessary, but then there is something else which is not the ego, which is this very dire negative sense of self that is getting developed in the process. Because I am bad, I am horrible, I am not good enough, I'm unworthy, I'm undeserving, and that becomes this very chronic inner self talk that becomes a part of the trauma and then continues to produce trauma in the individual. And that is a state that we're seeing that is leading to a lot more of mental distress than we've ever seen before. And so this ego formation being, the early years, and the connection of the individual from their sense of recognizing that I'm not this all bad or all good, that there are several aspects to us, and that we have to connect back to our true self, this essence that connects us to wisdom, to curiosity, to clarity, to compassion, that exists in us still, but that's disconnected, and we need to reconnect to it so that we can begin to find flexibility in our response, and the response not always going back to a default of I'm bad, because then that becomes my default programming and mechanics of my story of myself. And what we know is that we behave the way we believe we are. So if I'm thinking I'm bad, then that's the behaviors I'm going to produce as well. And then I'm going to try to shut that down, and I'm going to hate myself, and I get stuck up in this loop of self-punishment and self-denial, and all of those things that are leading to things like mental distress, and in young adults and children, from a very, very early age. And that continues to perpetuate the pain story as well. Because if I'm bad, what do I do with it? It continues to perpetuate shame and guilt. And then we're stuck in that loop and that story and that entanglement of darkness. And that really the journey of healing from trauma is to connect back and say, where did you learn that? Story about yourself. And how do I connect back, therefore, to something, what we call the light body or the true self within us, as a witness, to able to see that I'm not this whole bad thing that's causing me so much of pain and distress, that I believe that is who I am, so I'm self-rejecting.
Yeah, and I can imagine moving towards that real self, that inner self, that can also be scary because that's unknown as well.
Mm.
We don't know who we are. And therefore, that mechanism of defense, yeah, of being afraid of that thing which is unknown, if the unknown we are talking about ourselves, then we are also going to be afraid to discover who we are because we don't know who
Absolutely.
we are, and that could be very scary.
Yeah.
So we prefer to stay the way we are, even with as many faults as we have, just because we are scared to explore something new, and therefore our potential is never developed.
Mm-hmm.
That's I would say that's our comfort zone. Yeah, we
Yes.
stay in our comfort zone, and it's critical to understand that in order to advance, in order to grow, in order to thrive and not survive, to move forward in our lives and develop our potential, we are going to have to leave that comfort zone. And that's going to be painful.
Mm.
By definition, comfort zone is where we are comfortable. And when we are not, when we are uncomfortable, that's when there is going to be some pain. So I think it's critical to understand that anyone in a journey of self knowledge to understand who we are, but also self healing, it's a painful journey.
Mm-hmm.
And we may initiate this journey to avoid the pain, and the pain and the traumatic events created this pain, and then now I'm afraid of pain. But actually, pain is going to be the path forward as well. So it's important to differentiate this pain from suffering.
Yeah.
There may be pain, but we don't need to suffer from that. It's
Mm.
like growing pains. It's like a baby being born into the world. There is pain in birth, and yet it's something beautiful. So in the same way as somebody who is feeling trapped in trauma, I like this sudden, yeah, trapped in trauma. It's interesting. To get out of that, it's going to be painful. So to just imagine, no, I want to heal myself, and they think about something soft, caressing. It's like a soft, caressing feeling of healing myself. Well, actually, to heal yourself, you're gonna have to live that the comfort that you found in surviving in the way that you are,
Yeah.
to find something greater, to manifest your greatest potential. But it's gonna be painful. I think this is one of the reasons why um, yoga is so effective here. Because when you're doing yoga postures, there's often some pain.
Mm.
It's like you're stretching some part that's never been stretched before. And we maybe touched a little bit upon this. You mentioned that the body and the mind is connected, but maybe we can go deeper into that.
Yeah.
And but in any case, my body is stretching in a way that I've never been stretched before, and there is what a friend of mine used to call sweet pain. There
Mm.
is sweet pain in that. It's a pain that she would call sweet because it's the kind of pain that you know that afterwards you're gonna feel better. And I think this is the kind of pain, like Guru Nanak saying, pain is the, how is that? Pleasure is the poison and pain is the remedy.
Mm.
So we have gotten used and accustomed to a life that is so good. This kind of society that we live in right now, especially in the Western Hemisphere, is so good at providing pleasure.
Mm.
And there is sweets everywhere, and there is comfortable sofas, and there is all sort of things that can be very pleasant for who? For our ego.
Mm.
And yet we dislike discipline and commitment and anything that makes us put some effort because it's painful.
Yeah.
So, but anyone who crosses the door and they come into your session, they are already that's they already gave the step of commitment to go through probably some pain as well. So it's important to that's what I lost the track. We One of the things why yoga is so interesting is because you learn to differentiate the pain that is a sweet pain that you're
Mm.
going to grow from it, from the kind of pain that there is something wrong and we
Mm.
have to watch out because pain is useful. Pain tells us be careful, there's something wrong. So that's you can also meet that even within the body when you are doing yoga. So uh, to me, one of the first things one yogi practitioner has to learn is about body awareness and to recognize what's happening in the body. And when you recognize that something is painful, what kind of pain is that? Is
Mm.
that the kind of pain that is going to help you grow? Or is that the kind of pain that is telling you that something is wrong and you should stop? So I can imagine that translating these physical sensations to emotions or psycho-emotional state, we also need to learn, okay, what am I doing in my life? And is painful, but is this the kind of pain that is going to help me? Or is this the kind of pain that is telling me pull back?
Mm. That's really interesting you say that, because there's one where we talked about pain avoidance, and yet the only way through that is to experience it, which is the sweet spot of actually growing into the best version or the best self that we were born to be in the first place, before
Right.
the trauma occurred, before the resistance happened, before the defense came in, before all of those things occurred. But I know that in this season, we said that we would provide tools from a yogic perspective on in each episode. So, inviting you, Ardaas ji, to share one tool that we can take away from a yogic perspective on what you would suggest for the audience today to really be with and reflect.
Ah, yes, good. I would start from the most basic one, which is the breath. Starting from simply a deep breath. That's there's a few things in this in the breath that are very useful. But the breath we consider in yoga that this is the linking element that connects the body, emotions, the mind, and the spirit. Connects everything. So the body breathes, and the breathing in the body causes a lot of things happening within from the very first. Just simply, inhaling is like hugging your heart. The lungs are hugging your heart. So just inhaling is already like a little massage for your heart. Is inhaling deep is putting pressure on the how's it called, vagus nerve, which is stimulating the parasympathetic system. So it's calming you. The parasympathetic nervous system is to calm you. So just inhaling is already creating a lot of things that are going to be affecting us in many levels. That's only the physical thing. But and also inhaling, the diaphragm goes down and massages all the organs. So it's like a deep internal massage, incredibly good. Emotionally, the motions is, we say, energy in motion. And what thing is most in motion than the breath, right? That's constant, is continuous. And the emotions are intimately linked to the breath. We talk in yoga how emotions get trapped in the diaphragm. They get kind of like a cellular memory into the diaphragm. So fear or anger or sadness is gonna have a different signature in the diaphragm. Breathing in one way, or you breathe in one way or another depending on the emotional state that you are at the moment. So I believe psychiatrists and maybe psychologists as well, that they watch the breath of the client to know what's happening within, because sometimes they don't tell you the emotion. So you can watch the breath and understand the emotion that's happening. That's the emotional connection. The mind is connected to the breath. And when they say, oh, you're getting too troubled by your thoughts, well, take a few deep breaths. It works. And it's a deep connection between the state of the mind and the flowing of the breath. So if the mind is disturbed, the breath is disturbed. So that's very revealing as well. And the spirit, we say inspire, to inhale, to bring the spirit in. So as the breath comes in, we are talking about the breath of the spirit is coming into us. So the breath is the most fundamental thing in yoga that connects all the different elements. And even if somebody is bedridden, they cannot move their physical body. If they can breathe consciously, they can do yoga,
Mm.
because you can breathe in particular patterns and particular ways, and you can direct what is. I mean, they can do yoga on that level, no, even on the physical level, even if they cannot move the body. Now, what would be the tool tip for today? Would be just to watch the breath. to start with. And a few things. One is as we inhale, the diaphragm has to come down to make space for the lungs. And many people, and especially people who suffer some trauma, but also not just trauma, people who smoke or asthmatic or any kind of uh, something that is linked to the respiratory system can also have a strong impact on the diaphragm. But if the diaphragm is locked, there could be a situation that we call paradoxical breathing, which means that when you inhale, instead of the diaphragm going down and the navel coming out, the navel goes in. So one little clue for our audience would be to just try to inhale deeply. And if you feel that the navel is going in any way, that is a sign of something that we need to correct. Because in the natural breath, the navel should be going out. Now, when we have experienced trauma, or not even just trauma, but just stress, in a stressful situation, one of the stress mechanisms of the body is to tighten the muscles in case of the what you mentioned, the fight or flight mechanism. So the navel goes in. So if we feel that there is some stress, if there is too much stress in our life, we may experience it like that. The navel is going in. And if the navel is going in, especially when we inhale, that means the diaphragm is going against ourselves. It should be going down. If it's going up, it's going against us. So that means that we have an internal fight on every single breath, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I find that maybe 10 to 15% of people who come into a yoga class, I have experienced 10 to 15% of them, they have this paradoxical breathing, which is amazing. I had it myself before I started yoga. So my first tip would be learn to retrain your body to do full breaths. You can learn pretty easily in a few weeks of retraining yourself. When you inhale, let the belly button go out, and then the chest, and then the upper chest, and then on the exhale, the upper chest, then the chest, and the belly button in. Yeah, so it's like abdominal breathing, pectoral breathing, and the higher part, yeah, clavicular breathing, and then the clavicles, the chest, and finally the abdomen. And if you can learn to do just full deep yogic breath, what we call, in just three deep breaths has the capacity to reset you and find some rebalance yourself so you can process the emotion of whatever is happening and not accumulate more things into the subconscious that are going to be triggers for the ego and the trauma personality within, if we could say.
Wow, that's really amazing tip for us today, Ardasji. So three whole yogic breaths can create a lot of transformation. So we invite you all to do whole breaths, observing the belly button and your chest and the clavicle. And send us in some of your comments of how that worked for you, if you were to able to engage in it, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for that amazing tool, because breath is what connects us all to mind, body, and spirit, and brings us back into our body after disconnection. Um, and with that, I think we can close our first episode of season 2. Thank you so much for being here, everyone, and thank you, Ardaasji. Um, Anything that you want to say before we close?
That's it. Thank you, Nyana, and thank you everyone for listening in. See you next week.
See you next week. Thank you.